Masks are not just symbols of deception or disguise. They are foundational tools of human adaptation. Every person, at some point and in some form, wears a mask, shaped not from malice, but from necessity. These masks are not made of plastic or cloth. They are composed of language, behavior, tone, posture, and selective expression. They serve to mediate between the internal world of the individual and the external demands of society. The child learns early to present the good version of themselves to receive approval. The adult curates professionalism to remain employable. The grieving person smiles in public to avoid uncomfortable questions. The mask is not inherently false. It is often a fragment of truth, amplified or subdued to maintain safety, acceptance, or function. In this way, mask wearing is not a personal flaw but a social contract. We adapt to cultural norms, roles, and power structures by shaping how we are seen. The problem is not that masks exist, it is that over time, they can become fused with the face beneath. People forget where the performance ends and the self begins. This article is not a condemnation of masks. It is an examination of them, how they form, what they protect, what happens when they fall away, and what lies beneath. To understand the mask is to understand how people survive, conform, and evolve in a world that both demands authenticity and punishes it. We wear masks for reasons as complex as the human experience itself. Some masks are built for protection, shaped by early trauma or instability. When a child learns that crying is met with punishment or vulnerability invites ridicule, a mask of silence or toughness begins to form. This kind of mask is not deceit, it is survival. Other masks are constructed socially. We learn to perform roles: the agreeable student, the competent professional, the charming guest. These roles demand selective expression. In some environments, the mask is not optional, it is the price of participation. A person may smile through exhaustion, nod through disagreement, or suppress discomfort to maintain cohesion. This is not necessarily inauthentic, it is strategic. Power also creates masks. Those in positions of authority often suppress doubt or humility to maintain perceived control. Those without power may adopt deferential personas to navigate systems safely. The employee hides frustration. The marginalized person minimizes pain. The leader avoids appearing unsure. These masks are often reinforced by reward, promotion, praise, access. And the wearer learns which parts of themselves must remain hidden to function. Cultural expectations further shape mask formation. Gender, race, class, religion, all come with scripts. The stoic man, the self-sacrificing mother, the humble believer, the silent worker. These scripts are passed down and enforced subtly through approval, disapproval, tradition, and fear. Over time, the mask becomes habitual, even invisible to the one wearing it. Some masks are aspirational. People project an idealized version of themselves, hoping the image will eventually become real. Confidence is worn to disguise insecurity. Certainty is performed in the face of doubt. These masks are not malicious. They reflect desire. But even the pursuit of growth, when driven by image rather than substance, can distance a person from their true condition. Mask wearing is not weakness. It is adaptation. The human being in a chaotic and contradictory world must navigate countless pressures. The mask becomes a tool, but over time, a tool can become a trap. What begins as protection may evolve into self-erasure, and when the mask is worn too long, the person beneath may begin to forget how to exist without it. Masks are not created in a moment. They are built over time, layer by layer, through repetition and reinforcement. Unlike a sudden lie, a mask develops gradually, through small choices, mirrored behaviors, feedback loops, and unspoken rules. It forms in response to both internal and external pressures, and once solidified, it can begin to shape perception from within. The earliest structures of the mask are often formed in childhood. Praise and punishment teach a child what aspects of themselves are welcome and which must be hidden. Over time, those decisions become habits. The child who learns that being quiet earns safety becomes the adult who avoids conflict. The teenager who sees vulnerability mocked adopts sarcasm or aloofness. The emerging self is slowly traded for the manageable self. Institutions accelerate this process. Schools reward compliance, memorization, and the performance of learning more than curiosity. Workplaces demand stability, consistency, and the display of confidence, even when the internal state is disoriented or uncertain. Religious environments may encourage confession of sin but discourage expressions of doubt. Media and technology amplify idealized images, leaving little room for messiness or complexity. In each case, the mask is not only tolerated, it is rewarded. With time, the mask becomes internalized. What once felt like a performance becomes indistinguishable from personality. A person might describe themselves as independent when in fact they are simply unsupported. They might believe they are always fine because they have lost access to any deeper vocabulary. They may speak in practiced language, not because they are insincere, but because that language has replaced spontaneous thought. This is not deception, it is disconnection. The structure of the mask is also upheld by relational patterns. Friends and family often reinforce the familiar version of a person, resisting deviation from it. When someone begins to shift or remove their mask, by showing grief, changing beliefs, expressing doubt, they are sometimes met with confusion or rejection. This social resistance teaches people to return to the role even when it no longer fits. Eventually, the mask becomes not only a barrier between the individual and others, but a barrier between the individual and themselves. The capacity for reflection, for honest self-inquiry, diminishes. What remains is a managed identity, capable, efficient, and consistent, but often exhausted, isolated, and unrooted. The mask has done its job, but at a cost. It has protected the self by slowly displacing it. Masks rarely fall on their own. The process of unmasking is usually triggered by disruption, some force, internal or external, that renders the old structure insufficient. The mask, once effective, becomes brittle under pressure, and the underlying self begins to emerge, sometimes involuntarily. Crisis is one of the most common catalysts. A sudden loss, serious illness, or major failure can dismantle the persona a person has built. The strong one breaks. The cheerful one falls silent. The capable one collapses under exhaustion. In crisis, the mask no longer functions, and the individual is forced to confront what has been hidden or avoided. This confrontation is rarely graceful. It is often chaotic, filled with confusion, fear, and the rawness of exposure. Self-awareness can also trigger unmasking. This may arise through solitude, reflection, or extended periods of silence where the performance has nothing to reflect itself against. In the absence of mirrors, audiences, expectations, roles, a person may begin to hear themselves again. Sometimes therapy or deep conversation creates this space. Sometimes it comes through spiritual awakening or intellectual disillusionment. The illusion cracks, not through catastrophe, but through clarity. External disruption plays a role as well. When someone else names the truth, questions the performance, or refuses to engage with the mask, the pressure to maintain it intensifies. A confrontation may cause the mask to tighten, or it may shatter it altogether. Betrayal can do the same. A friend or partner who sees behind the curtain and walks away may force the individual to ask who they are when no one is watching. There is also philosophical unmasking, the quiet but seismic moment when a person realizes they have been living a narrative constructed by others. This may involve a collapse of ideology, a rupture in belief, or a reevaluation of purpose. In such cases, the unmasking is not dramatic but existential. The person no longer believes the story that gave the mask meaning. What follows is often a season of disorientation, not because something was destroyed, but because the framework that sustained the illusion is gone. Whether through pain, awareness, confrontation, or awakening, the stripping of the mask is not about revelation alone. It is about necessity. Something deeper than performance begins to demand space. The self, long silenced or modified, starts to speak, and when it does, the mask, no matter how practiced, cannot stay. What lies beneath the mask is not always clarity. It is rarely a fully formed identity waiting to emerge. More often it is ambiguity, fragmentation, and vulnerability. The self that has been hidden, edited, or abandoned does not rush forward with confidence. It surfaces slowly, awkwardly, often in pieces. Some discover beneath the mask a version of themselves they have forgotten, quiet desires, long-neglected questions, unprocessed pain. Others find not a clear self, but a vast silence. After years of role-playing, the individual may have little connection to their own thoughts or preferences. The mask may have been worn so tightly and for so long that it became mistaken for the face. Without it, there is confusion. The process of encountering what lies beneath is not always a moment of liberation. It can be destabilizing. The loss of identity, even a false one, can produce grief. The person may feel emotionally raw, intellectually uncertain, or socially disconnected. Without the familiar cues and performances, they may no longer know how to relate, how to speak, or how to belong. Yet within this disorientation is possibility. Beneath the mask, there is also access to authenticity, to nuance, to presence. The individual begins to feel what was previously denied or suppressed. The range of emotional experience expands. Joy is no longer performed but encountered. Sadness is no longer hidden but honored. Complexity is no longer managed but accepted. The stripped self is not immediately coherent. It is a raw material. Some parts are underdeveloped, others overcompensated. There may be contradictions, confusion, and unintegrated pieces. But in place of image is truth. And truth, though difficult, offers a foundation. It allows the person to begin the slower, harder work of forming an identity that is internally aligned rather than externally constructed. The emergence of the unmasked self often brings with it a deep internal stillness. Not the stillness of numbness or withdrawal, but the kind that comes when there is nothing left to perform. Silence is no longer a strategy. It becomes space. From that space, new thoughts form, unfiltered, unapproved, unshaped by audience. And from those thoughts, a life can be built that no longer requires disguise. What lies beneath the mask is not purity, perfection, or enlightenment. It is humanity, unfinished, inconsistent, but real. And it is from this place, not the polished surface, that meaningful change becomes possible. When the mask is removed, the person is faced with a choice: how to respond to their own exposure. This response is not uniform. Some will resist, others will collapse, and a few will begin the long process of integration. The unmasking is not the end of transformation, it is the beginning of decision. Resistance is common. Many attempt to put the mask back on, especially when the discomfort of authenticity becomes too great. This may take the form of denial, distraction, or an aggressive return to familiar roles. The person may dismiss the unmasking as a phase, minimize its significance, or seek out environments where the old performance is still rewarded. Remasking offers immediate relief, but often deepens internal dissonance over time. The individual knows, even subconsciously, that the performance is no longer sustainable. Others experience collapse. The removal of the mask destabilizes their sense of identity to such a degree that functioning becomes difficult. This can manifest as emotional numbness, existential despair, or the feeling of being entirely lost. Without the familiar structure of the mask, there is no clear self to organize thought, behavior, or purpose. In this state, some turn to ideology, addiction, or dependence in an attempt to regain control. Collapse is not failure, it is the exposure of dependency on an external framework. With support, even this can become a gateway to healing. For some, unmasking leads to reconstruction. They begin the slow and often unglamorous work of integrating the parts of themselves that were once hidden, denied, or fragmented. This is not a return to the mask, but the development of a self that is flexible, honest, and whole. Reconstruction does not demand constant transparency. It demands congruence. The internal life begins to align with the external presentation, not perfectly, but intentionally. This integration process includes recognizing that not all former masks were useless. Some protected what could not yet be spoken. Some allowed survival in hostile systems. The goal is not to discard all adaptation, but to discern what is no longer needed. Discernment becomes the tool by which a person decides how to move in the world, not based on fear or role, but on reality and context. Unmasking also challenges collective systems. Institutions often depend on masks to maintain order, image, and predictability. When one person removes theirs, it can create discomfort in the group. They may be perceived as unstable, rebellious, or threatening, not because they are unwell, but because they are no longer predictable. Authenticity disrupts patterns. The unmasked individual becomes harder to manage, harder to categorize, harder to control. This is why many systems reward conformity and marginalize complexity. But those who remain unmasked and learn to live that way begin to develop a different kind of authority, not one based on power or approval, but on integrity. Their words carry weight not because they are loud, but because they are rooted. They become difficult to manipulate, not because they are stubborn, but because they are internally referenced. They develop resilience not by avoiding discomfort, but by facing it without disguise. To live without a mask is not to live without boundaries. To live without a mask is not to live without boundaries. It is to live without illusion. It is to enter a room without rehearsing, to speak without calculating the outcome, to exist without constantly adjusting for the comfort of others. It is a form of interior freedom, quiet, steady, and unshakable. And though the unmasked life is not always comfortable, it is sustainable. It can bend, adapt, and respond. It is not brittle like the mask. It breathes, it grows, and it does not need to be defended because it is no longer pretending.